Crucible by Troy Denning was meant to be one big standalone adventure for Han and Leia and Luke before they retired from active duty and passed the torch to the next generation. However, it was also meant to bridge the gap between the Fate of the Jedi series and both Christie Golden's Jaina-centric Sword of the Jedi trilogy, as well as Troy Denning's Untitled trilogy. Crucible was released on July 9th, 2013, and became the last chronological novel in the expanded universe after the canon reboot in April of 2014. I didn't really know anything about Crucible going into it. However, multiple people told me that I would not like it, which made me interested to see what was Crucible like and why was everyone telling me that. So first, a brief summary. When Han Solo and Leia Organa arrive at the Chiloon Rift to help Lando Calrissian with troubles with his mining operation, little do they know that threats will escalate and Lando's business will suffer mass casualties. With Luke Skywalker arriving on the scene, the trio undertake to figure out what is going on and what is truly at stake. And for this mission in particular, things do not look good for our aged heroes. So Crucible is one of those novels where the plot starts out pretty simple. Lando's having trouble with pirates. He asks if Leia and Han can come and help, and then begins to spiral out of control from there. We have the Qreph brothers, who are Klumi, a species dating all the way back to the original Star Wars role-playing game. They want to take over Lando's business, and they're willing to kill a lot of people to achieve their ends. Besides Han and Leia and Luke and Lando, we also have Ben Skywalker and Tahiri Vela in the mix because they are looking for one of Luke Skywalker's quest knights who was sent off to find Mortis. She went missing, and so they're also in the Chiloon Rift. The Qreph brothers have hired Mandalorians led by Mirta Gev, Boba Fett's granddaughter, and they've also hired a dark side Force user named Savara Rain, who just so happens to be Vestara Khai in disguise. As it turns out, the Qreph brothers are buying up businesses in the Rift because they are trying to hide something. What they are trying to hide is a celestial monolith, not Mortis related in the end, but similar, that leads to a very freaky deaky Crystal Star-esque scene in which Luke and Leia and Han are in this raw force power realm fighting the Qreph brothers, and it gets very metaphysical. So let's talk about Lando first, the man who summoned the trio to this debacle. Since Lando is the consummate businessman, it makes sense that he has another endeavor, and in fact a mining endeavor, something that he's done before and is pretty knowledgeable about. This is mining asteroids that are rich in these minerals and metals within the Rift, except pirates are making it very difficult for him to get the job done, which is why he calls in Leia and Han in the first place. Lando's not a key part of this story, but he is quintessentially Lando here. He's looking out for his friends. He's got a great poker face. The only weakness he has is like threats to his family. Don't threaten his family. He's only got Tendra and Chance and he loves them. And in the end, when everyone decides that they want to take a break for a while, Lando, who is the oldest of them all, is the only one who says, "I'm not retiring. I'm never retiring." Lando always has another scheme in mind. Lando has some associates that we meet here. The first is a young man named Omad Kaig, who leads Han and Leia to his mining facility. Omad is a native of the Rift, and so when they're finally trying to track down the Qreph brothers' base, he's the one that's able to get them there because he knows it best. He feels rather like a young Han-esque character because he trades an awful lot off of bravado and luck. Lando's second in command at his mining facility is a woman named Dina Yus, who is very much not as she seems. She is number one, an espionage agent for the Qreph brothers. Her actions directly lead to the death of 30,000 people on Lando's facility, which she feels very bad about, but as it turns out, she is like a biot, a constructed being, so she can't disobey the Kalumi brothers if they give her a direct order. She recognizes what she's done is wrong, but she also does not really see a way out of her situation. And at the end, Ben and Tahiri are going to be taking her back to the Jedi Council to figure out a sentence. How do you serve that out when you've just killed 30,000 people of the place you worked for? We have a Duros woman named Ohali, who is the Jedi Knight, one of 10 that was sent out into the galaxy to find the Mortis monolith, and she made her way to the Chiloon Rift and then was captured by the Qreph brothers. I'm not crazy about the term quest knight here. I mean, I guess it makes sense. They're on a quest, they're Jedi Knights, but the first time I saw it written down, my brain just went, Grail Quest! And I could not get rid of like those Arthurian overtones. For most of the book, Ohali is missing. We really don't see her until Han arrives on the Qreph brothers' base. And she's in a bad situation, but she makes the most of it and helps Han and herself escape, and in the end, despite everything she went through, seems to be okay. Han and Leia set out on this mission for Lando because I think, number one, they want to see Lando again, and number two, the Jedi Council was like, hey, you can go. It's interesting to me that Leia, age-wise, is one of the more senior of the Jedi Knights, but because she has much less experience and really only achieved knighthood during the Dark Nest trilogy, she's not a master like her daughter is. She's a little bit lower down on the totem pole. Han and Leia really go through the ringer here, though. When the asteroids hit Lando's facility, they were in the front of the speeder. They take the worst of the damage. They had to be in back to tanks for a while. Han lost an eye? What? And that's really a running theme in Crucible, is just that our heroes are constantly beaten down over and over and over again. Look, I know that they're old. Han is in his 70s at this point. Luke and Leia are in their 60s, but this really seemed to be like, let's show how much bad physical stuff the trio can go through that pretty much forces them to retire at the end because they're not young and they can't put up with that anymore. They attempt a scheme in a casino in the Rift, and Han is captured by the Qreph brothers' Mandalorian forces. Luke and Leia try to rescue him, and they are severely injured in the process. Han is taken back to their base, where they put probes into his brain and are basically mentally torturing him to try to map his brain and get information from him. There are multiple times in this story where Leia doesn't know if Han's still alive, Han doesn't know if Leia's still alive. They're willing to wreak havoc to avenge the other, and I was like, on the one hand, I feel like Han and Leia at this point have such a good relationship. They work so well together. Towards the end, they say something like, Han doesn't have the Force, yet he's been keeping up with Leia and the Jedi for 40 years, which is so impressive. But at the same time, I feel like this constant, like, I must avenge the death of my partner. I'm like, guys, please calm down. Please, please calm down. I feel like Han keeps a good attitude. His requisite humor or sarcasm more is present here. But yeah, the story gets really dark. And Luke is sort of feeling bored. We have one scene of him with the other Jedi, and that's when they're like, we haven't really heard from Ben and Tahiri in a while, and Han and Leia say that they need some help, and Luke's like, I'll go. And this very much seemed like it's been a year since the end of Apocalypse, and Luke's getting some itchy feet. His wound that Abeloth gave him is still bothering him, but he just wants to get out and about. He wants to do stuff, and so was Luke Skywalker the best choice to send here? Probably not, but he sent himself, and he wanted to see his son and his sister and his best bud, so I can't really blame him. And Luke is the one running interference the whole time, where it seems like Leia especially is like, I must revenge Han. And he's like, look, that's not the Jedi way. Also, we don't know he's dead. Han is Han. He is very lucky. I think he'll get out of this okay. I did find it weird that once they realize Vestara Khai is there, he's just like, yeah, I gotta take her out. And two, once we run into Ben and Tahiri, who have been looking for the missing quest knight, Ben realizing that Vestara Khai's there, he's like, I'm gonna kill her. And I was like, I'm not sure if really that's the tract that either Skywalker would take. I mean, I could see Leia taking that approach because she was there when Vestara, through the thermal detonator, threatened her husband and her granddaughter. But even at the end of Apocalypse, Ben hadn't given up on Vestara, and I think with the way that Ben especially is so compassionate and so wanting the best for people, that even knowing that Vestara betrayed him, I don't think that his first response to hearing that she's on the Qreph base and she's there is like, we're gonna get some murder done. I don't see that as being his approach at all. I know that in an interview from 2014, Troy Denning talked about the fact that he didn't think that Ben and Vestara were endgame at all, that this was like a young fling and that they would get over it. Also, I don't think he thinks that Vestara is redeemable. And while I didn't think that she was going to be redeemable in Fate of the Jedi, I feel like to just come right out and say, this character is permanently evil, no one will turn her to the light side, is like, not cool. I don't like that. I don't like that someone is irredeemably bad. I just felt like with Vestara, from the upbringing she had and the culture she came from, she'd need more life experiences before she'd be able to truly make that decision. And I think that interacting with Ben, even when they're on the outs, could lead to that point. And on the baddie front, Mirta and her gang of Mandalorians are working for the Kalumi because they said that they can find a cure for the nano killer that's keeping her and her grandfather from going back to Mandalore. Yeah, they lying. Vestara, under a pseudonym, is also working for the Kalumi brothers. In the end, they end up leaving together, the Mandalorians, Mirta, and Vestara all in ship. So maybe in future stories we would have seen them teamed up together, which would be an interesting team up. They sort of seemed like Mirta and Vestara did not get along well because they were both trying to take control. So how that would have played out in future stories could have been interesting, but it's also a moot point because we didn't get any future stories. And the Qreph brothers want vengeance against their mother, who was killed on Ord Mantell. Apparently this harkens all the way back to, again, the Star Wars role-playing game, something that Troy Denning wrote in the 90s. And Han was one of the last people to see her alive, so they suspect him of her death. But also they just want power and wealth and to control the galaxy, and also in the end they go through the gate because they want to be force sensitive. But it's hard for me to get over the fact that they look like little alien babies, like big head, little body. They gotta float around in these hoverpod things. And when we first see them, that very first scene where they're trying to shake down Lando, they came across in a farcical manner where I thought, oh, these are gonna be like sort of funny bad guys, where they're bad guys, but they make you laugh. No, in the end, they are not funny bad guys. They torture people, they kill thousands and thousands of people, they're just garbage. The whole, like, this might be comedic bad guys, for me, didn't really play out in the end. So my first issue with Crucible was, I believe, why everyone said I would hate it. This book is very violent. I would say it's not graphic in the way that some other of Troy Denning's Star Wars books are graphic, like Star by Star, where you're reading it and you're like, ugh, ugh. But this is still pretty bad. I mean, we have Han losing an eye, and it's just remarked on like twice, and then we keep going. Meanwhile, I keep turning back to Han lost an eye, and he's like, this eye's better. And I'm like, what the hell? Luke and Leia are on a ship and they blow missiles into this other ship, and then they blow the like reactor core and they're like super badly damaged. That sounds like they're robots or something. They're super badly injured, and they're having to do Jedi healing trances and then have to come out of it too soon. And like Leia's burned half the hair off her head and has burn marks everywhere. And then they're fighting the Nargons and her back gets ripped up, and like Luke's got a hole in his abdomen. But then Lando puts them in Bacta and they're a little bit better. But then like that final fight in that mystical monolith realm, they're like dying and they come back. And it's weird. It almost felt to me like, again, that this was supposed to be a final adventure before they sort of retire for now. I'm not sure how much that retirement was going to stick, because that was one of the things they wanted to do in the New Jedi Order series, was pass the torch to the next generation, except then Han and Leia and Luke were pivotal parts of the Dark Nest trilogy in every book going forward, so not sure how long the retirement would last. Retire for now. But it seemed like to show why they would want to retire, they had to be broken and crushed down in the dirt. So you go, yeah, I could see why you'd want to retire after that. But like, why couldn't this just be a fun adventure? Why couldn't this just be helping Lando with some issues, but they don't need to be brutally wounded every step of the way? It could just be them realizing like, hey, we're not the young feisty folk we used to be. You know, it was good to get one last adventure under our belts, but we're ready to pass it on to someone else without them being like brutalized here. My second issue with Crucible is that I wish the Mortis stuff hadn't been brought into here. Obviously, Denning wanted this to bridge the gap between Fate of the Jedi and the books that would follow. This monolith, it's not the Mortis monolith, it's another monolith. And that just got a little too weird for me. If you told me going into it, the end will get very akin to the Crystal Star, I would have said, you're crazy. Why would they do something like that? But it did feel like that. They're fighting in this spiritual realm, and they're filled with light, and the Qreph brothers are filled with shadows, and they just explode them into nothing. And then Leia's gone, and Han finds her, and she's young like Empire Strikes Back Leia, and she doesn't remember anything, so he has to tell her everything that happened, and she slowly grows older before his eyes. Meanwhile, they come across Luke after that, and Luke looks older than he's been, but whatever. And it just reminded me too much of everyone diving into Waru's golden goodness, and Han having to go in and get Luke and Leia out. Like, Han brings Leia back to herself here, and then they're all like, okay, we gotta leave. I was not expecting that from the beginning, all like, let's save Lando's mining business, that we would get into this metaphysical stuff there. Because I think my biggest issue with Crucible is that it's trying to do too much. It's trying to tell this big adventure for the trio. It's trying to bridge the gap between the Fate of the Jedi series and future trilogies. It's trying to wrap the things into this mythos that I wasn't even crazy about in the Fate of the Jedi, so I'm not crazy about here. I think compared to Millennium Falcon as a standalone in-between series was much more successful to me. Sure, I didn't like the heavy focus on Jadok. I was much more interested in Han and Leia and Alana's adventure there, but I felt like it set up some things for Fate of the Jedi. We had Seth Hallen going crazy at one point, but it was mostly a story that stood on its own feet, and it was an enjoyable story. I never felt like our heroes were being kicked around and stomped on. Instead, it seemed like them having some good, nurturing family time and growth. And I think that, you know, having the presence of a child like Alana there really helped. With Crucible, we have this adventure, but it gets darker and darker and darker as we progress. And it's trying too hard to connect to stuff to come. Like, I wouldn't have included the quest night or any of that in there. I wouldn't have had the monolith. This seems less like a standalone and more like a stepping stone to, I'm guessing especially, Troy Denning's untitled trilogy that was canceled. And whereas I think that you could have not read Legacy of the Force and read Millennium Falcon and still got a lot from it, I do not really think that you could have picked up Crucible without reading the Fate of the Jedi series. I just think that, especially all the Mortis stuff, you would have been lost. And so I think that, in particular, works to the novel's detriment. So, in short, Crucible provides the reader with one big, possibly final adventure for Lando and Luke and Han and Leia. 3 of them are ready to retire at the end. Lando, not so much. Unfortunately, it's pretty dark and really beats our heroes down to get to that conclusion, and the conclusion is weird. It's very, very weird. And having now read it, I have to agree with all of y'all who told me I wouldn't like Crucible. You were right. I didn't like Crucible because I think it's too dependent on stuff that was to come and just wasn't fun to read. So next time, I'm going to be reading one final post-New Jedi Order story for 2023. This one, a short story featuring Tenel Ka, Alana Jo Solo, and Jaina Solo that appeared in Star Wars Insider magazine. Good Hunting by Christy Golden.